Hi everyone. Sorry it's been such a long time. Uh, it's been very, very busy for me. Lots of work, lots of looking after little Tobias. But yeah, I managed to find a free Sunday afternoon for once. So I thought I'd finish off this Explained Correctly series. And that leaves us with the final type, which is the ISTP, the Craftsman. So again, as I've said with the other introverted types in this, I'm going to be switching the J and the P, as it were, for the introverted types from conventional Myers-Briggs typology understanding. And the reason for that, as I've set out in the P and J Explained Correctly video, is that the introverts lead with perception. So it would make sense that therefore, if their dominant function is perception, they should be a perceiving type. So when I refer to the ISTP, I refer to the type that leads with introverted sensing backed up by extroverted thinking. That is the ego block for the Craftsman. Now, the Craftsman, the ISTP, it's right at the end of the sort of the type cycle, you could say. It's always listed as number 16, and the reason is it's sort of the old fellow right at the end. It's quite quiet, quite unassuming, very sort of grounded, very sort of practical in day-to-day common sense activities. When you have introverted sensation and extroverted thinking coming together, it is that definitely that focus on practicality, on doing things to a high level of quality, of creating not only high quality but largely self-sufficient and minimized wastage of resources processes. That's really what it's about for these types. It's creating things that work well in and of themselves, are good quality, all different components work well in synergy with each other. There isn't much minimal waste. There's minimal reliance on things outside of itself in order to function. That is that sort of natural calm and flow and confluence of detail of introverted sensing with the optimization and the high levels of efficiency and evidence-based practice of extroverted thinking. So what we start off with is introverted sensation as a dominant function, and the SLI is a type which is very inclined to see things in terms of maintaining that day-to-day balance, that that flow of process in the here and now. They're very grounded, very down-to-earth types, quite unassuming, very much about their immediate local surroundings being quite sort of calm, being quite tranquil, being a place in which they are essentially left to themselves in order to do things which they feel are of high quality of use. These are types which very much value their own peace, their own stability, their own quiet. These are types which don't like being suddenly interrupted or disturbed. These are types which like to find that calm flow of a process of doing things well, just in the moment, working with their hands, often quite directly with the thing they're trying to quite stereotypically craft, you could say, or simply work on and improve on, making little tweaks, making little changes here and there to bring out the maximized quality. So this is the type which is very much unlike the ESTJ, which is continuously improving and taking things on and maximizing their efficiency across the board. This is a type that's far more about the slow, careful, experience-driven refinements with, again, some trial and error, but it's about working very much with a particular thing and making it, molding it, crafting it into the finest excellence of quality of product. And that's a very key thing for this type. They are a type which likes quality and tries very earnestly to do the things which they are doing well. Now, unlike I said, the ESTJ, this is a type which doesn't do lots of different things so much. This is the type which is used to finding certain areas of really mastering that craft in that specific area. Because this isn't a type which necessarily sees lots of different alternatives they could be doing. They're very grounded in the day-to-day and in the practice of that day-to-day. And in the meantime, they're again, quite calm, very much, often quite unflappable people, at least on the outside. They are able to maintain things very well, keep things running, keep things going. You think of the sort of the very quiet, odd jobs person who keeps your plumbing working, who keeps your lighting fixed, who keeps all the things running around. You don't see these people very much. They're not interested in drawing attention to themselves. They're just interested in setting out to do what they're meant to be doing and doing it well. And that introverted sensation is that attention to detail, that attention to quality, and that sort of quite earthy groundedness in how they act and in what they do. Now, supporting the introverted sensation is the extroverted thinking. So the ISTP is a type that has a very good access to on the ground, empirically observed factual information. And through practicing, through taking things on, through trying things out, they're often learning through their acting, through their doing things, through their making and improving. Constantly learning, constantly looking at how they can be improving things, making things work better. It's not the sort of relentless dynamo of an extroverted thinking leading type. It's far more subtle than that. And this is a type which, because of introverted sensation, is not interested in wasting energy. So this type doesn't often get up and do lots of things unless they think, right, this is the right time and this is the right place where I should be doing this and I can do this well. So you don't see the sort of frenetic, pragmatic activity you'd expect in other extroverted logic types in an ISTP. It is a type which often doesn't move very much at all. Quite calm, quite relaxed. They might get up, go for a walk around nature, that sort of thing. But the practicality is there in terms of often deciding when not to act as much as actually acting. Because they'll look at the situation, they'll think, is there actually any point in me getting up and doing anything right now at all? Or am I actually a better use just sitting on my bottom and waiting for the thing to finish? It'll sort itself out. And that's kind of the attitude of an ISTP. They don't want to create a too many cooks situation. Instead, they will find that moment in time, that specific moment where they can find, okay, this is where I can make the lightest work. This is where I can get this done without all the unnecessary frills and efforts. Because these aren't types about frills. It's about a simplicity in action and doing things efficiently and well. But yes, when they are acting, that introverted sensation is driving them to do it to a high level of quality, and they'll be learning and grafting on the different processes and approaches that they think work best, which lead to the best sorts of actions. And these are types which are very good when you ask them. They don't proactively offer their advice, but they are very good at giving you advice in terms of how to do things well. They don't throw it around. They don't push it in the way that sometimes an ESTJ might. This is a type which is very much about keeping themselves to themselves. But if you were to have a good relationship with them, they are very good at lending their often quite considerable factual knowledge in support of what you're doing. This is a type which also often has a great deal of humility. So even though they have very strong extroverted thinking, they aren't a type which necessarily portrays themselves as being especially smart or certainly not necessarily very intellectual. They're very grounded. They have this sort of humbleness to them. They're not a type which tends to take themselves too seriously, and they often don't like people who do take themselves too seriously. This is a type which is just tries to do a good practical job in whatever they do. Okay, so now we come to the super ego block, whereas the ego block is what the type brings to the world. It's their strong, valued core. The super ego block is sort of what is pushed onto them from society, from the world around them. And for the ISTP, this is introverted intuition and extroverted feeling, the more sort of dramatic, more grandiose aspects of life, the more sort of non-factual, non-empirical, more spiritualistic aspects. So ISTPs are types which have a great capacity actually for sitting down and reflecting things, thinking things through. They often quite value the idea of being able to sit down and think things through, not being so hasty into action. Because of this, they are actually able to think ahead, more so than an ESTJ would be able to think ahead with any sort of reliability. An ISTP is able to see what events are likely to be happening. That also helps them in knowing when to act. They seeing when something doesn't actually need them to get up and do anything at all. It actually helps them to better mind their own business by being able to see to some extent activities here and now, what that's going to lead to in the future. And they are relatively good at predicting that, as long as it's within a scope that is familiar to them. They don't like doing this sort of detaching and thinking about where things are going, because they are naturally grounded in here in the moment, and they'd rather be in the present moment, smelling the roses, seeing how things are right now, rather than detaching towards something which isn't grounded, isn't based in their immediate sense impressions. However, they can sit and reflect and think things through. It does get also more depressing for them, because when they go into that space, when they're detaching from the day-to-day, first of all, it feels unnatural because they want to feel attached and immersed in the day-to-day. That's a key drive for them. But also they can get depressed by more fatalistic understandings of how things will turn out necessarily. And they may feel boxed in by that future they may have envisaged, not knowing how else it could be. This is a type for whom introvert intuition is stronger than extrovert intuition. So in playing this more future-oriented role when they feel they have to, because there may be unpleasant experiences, disruption further along they need to be thinking about, or simply they know that action is not even worth doing anything for because it will lead to bad outcomes if they even try, and they might as well just sit down and do nothing. They can get caught up in that thing necessarily happening rather than seeing how else it could be. So this is a space where they will rise to the occasion. They'll see the problem on the horizon, but they also get a bit sort of depressed about it and not necessarily know how to think outside the box in terms of how to then solve it. They greatly desire that, of course. Extroverted feeling, the vulnerable function. So for an ISTP, extroverted feeling is something they simply do not have the access to, and they don't have any real interest in having access to it either. It is almost a willful blind spot. So ISTPs are one of the least, perhaps the least showy out of all the types. They are the most down to earth, the most grounded in who they are, and who they are can be a bit of a mess, but they will live and breathe that authenticity of being, a bit of a bum sometimes, being someone who's sort of, just living in the salt of the earth and not really caring what other people really think about them, and just being themselves. And they will be themselves, and that's who they are. Take it or leave it. If you don't like what they're about, why are you coming in and putting all your pressure and all your expectation on them? That's not to say that the ISTP isn't interested in working on and developing themselves. They are, but that's for themselves. That's for their own growth. It's not to fit into some sort of social expectation how they're meant to be coming across. So these are not types that create image. These are not types which try to present themselves in some sort of deliberate way. Instead, they simply live out their authenticity of being a very grounded, down to earth sort of person. And the extroverted feeling is just not in the picture. These are types which, when they speak, they're often quite dry, often quite matter of fact. While they can actually be very, very funny, I can think of some very hilarious examples, like Rowan Atkinson, I think is a good example of this type. That's often a very sort of put on humor because it's clearly ridiculous. It's not the sort of humor designed to move people's hearts and emotions in a certain way, and this type is very unlikely to do that. Similarly, when they talk about themselves, these are not types which are going to brag or display things or whitewash how they come across in the best way possible to impress you. They have no interest in impressing you, and they don't particularly take interest in people trying to impress them. They are, again, very grounded. They have that humility to them. And when they're talking about themselves, they often present things in perhaps the most warts and all way. They have no interest in shaping things up to look differently. So yeah, very, very grounded, very quite humble, very not at all political sorts of people. Yeah, so because of that, that can mean that they are misunderstood by people. They may be seen as even quite cold or unapproachable by people. And certainly ISTPs like their personal space. They like to have their time. They don't like being interrupted. But these are actually quite gentle souls. Introverted sensing and their leading function makes them very gentle, actually quite harmony seeking. And they're not out to cause a fight with anyone. Although they are certainly not going to mince words either. They will speak the way they think is true to them and authentic to them. So that might upset people. It might piss people off. It might lead to them not being popular. And they have absolutely no interest in being popular anyway. So there we go. This is the type which can actually say things quite inappropriately, put people off, upset people. And yeah, if they see they've upset people and it's sort of caused harm, they'll apologize for that. They're not out to upset people, but neither are they really thinking about how the words that they're saying are meant to be landing with people to have some sort of effect that's meant to change people's emotions some sort of way. It's just not something which crosses into their way of thinking. Okay, now we get to the super id block, the part which is valued but not strong. So this is an area of aspiration for this type. Extroverted intuition and introverted feeling come together here. And this is where the ISTP is looking for help, really. That internal development and growth, the understanding of their potential as a human being to be a better person and to grow and develop there. The ISTP is a type which is very much about what they're working with in a very physical, explicitly concrete way. They can learn and develop skills. They can work and refine their craft. And if keeping to their own business, they can create wonderful things that way. But there is something that has an allure to them of developing the internal, of becoming that best person, of realizing that inner potential which eludes them. So for the ISTP, they take, and then they're actually very open to guidance in this area, especially in terms of extroverted intuition, which is their suggestive function. The ISTP is very weak in this area. I was talking about their introverted intuition, how they can sometimes feel almost locked into this fatalism, which is depressing for them because they don't like fate, they don't like the idea of things being definitely going to turn out that way. They just have trouble seeing any other way in which it's going to turn out. How else can we think about this? And this is the thing for the ISTP. They're very good at analyzing and breaking down the real, the concrete, the tangible. They're not good at throwing their mind into a completely different set of experiences that they have never directly experienced themselves. They can't dance across multiple perspectives with any level of confidence. So they really appreciate people who can broaden the horizons of their universe, who can open them up to new ways of thinking and new ways of relating to different kinds of people and hearing these different perspectives. You think of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, someone who I think is very much a good example of the ISTP, very much about, preferring to spend time with her horses. Another thing, ISTPs are very much into looking after pets and animals quite often, because these are, again, quite sort of down to earthy, real beings, well, animals that they can relate to. And they can like learning a craft that often can involve grooming or breeding horses and all the specifics of that level of expertise. But one thing Her Majesty really enjoyed was going around to thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people across the course of her life, and meeting these different people, hearing their perspectives. That really opened and broadened her horizons, her perspectives of the world. So she was very appreciative of that. These are types which are not closed-minded. They are actually open-minded, unlike how they are portrayed in the sort of the in the Myers-Briggs land. These are types which are open to being shown new ways of thinking, new ways of feeling, new ways of approaching a situation. They are just not the ones who lead that opening, that exploration. They're very much a receiver of that from someone else. And the thing about the ISTP is that they don't want to feel stagnant in their comfort zones. They don't want to be doing the same thing all the time for the rest of their life. Yes, they're very good at mastering that craft over time, but they are looking to be opened out in their focus. And they want to feel as if their life is not stagnant, that it is growing, that it is developing, that they are working into other things over time. But to have that adventure, they need to know what those alternatives are. So someone who can provide that is immensely valuable to them. And someone who can see that potential within them and say, this could be amazing if you were to be doing this. That gives the ISTP a new direction they can go in, and they'll go after it. They'll be very excited by this. This is a type which, on their own, they have a sort of inertia. They get caught up in their own inertia, and they kind of need some sort of new, fresh perspective to get them out of that feeling of being stuck in the mud and to be able to go into that new thing. So, yeah, extrovert intuition, very valued, but also a very weak area for the ISTP. Now, there's also the mobilizing function, introverted feeling. So this is what the ISTP is more proactively working on themselves. So again, ISTPs are very sincere, not necessarily nice sounding all the time. They're definitely sincere and authentic in what they're saying. They will often call a spade a spade. But there's this idea that they are really trying to exercise sincerely their good intentions. And as a Delta type, as a type which leans towards good faith judgment as opposed to harsh judgment, ISTPs are trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. But in giving people the benefit of the doubt, they also can set themselves up to feel disappointed by people who then may let them down, who then may actually show themselves to not have them as good intentions as they thought. But the idea here is that an ISTP is kind of looking for those people whom they can have those closest relationships with, who can build those special bonds with. ISTPs yearn to dedicate themselves to certain individuals, to have those closest bonds. It's why there's, again, that the stereotype of the ISTP keeping a pet dog and really cherishing that pet, having those close relationships with animals. Why with animals? Well, there's a sort of there's a guilelessness to an animal. They're not out to deceive you. They're not out to appear in some different way or expect you to comport yourself in a certain way that society requires of you. And so the ISTP feels a sort of natural kinship with these animals who can sort of just be and act in a more purely practical and instinct driven world. So yeah, ISTPs are strongly driven to form these very, very close bonds, and they'll cherish those close bonds. But the idea is that these are not popular types, hence the rub. They're not types which know how to make themselves likable to all sorts of people, but they dearly want one or two very close relationships that they can feel dedicated to. And they'll give so much of themselves, and they'll be endlessly loyal to such people, and will often put up with all sorts of problems without complaining, without wanting to worry or bother that person. ISTPs have a very sort of sweet, soft core, which is able to show itself to those they're closest to. But they need to have that relationship first. Without that, ISTPs are often, again, they'll rely on that self-sufficiency, that ability to manage things themselves, to be out, often sometimes in the wilderness on their own and experiencing nature and just relying on their own knowledge, their own practicality and capabilities, and their own ability to not waste the resources they have in order to get by. But yeah, very sincere, very authentic people, salt of the earth people quite often, who really want to cultivate that close one-to-one relationship with someone else. Yeah, and what I will say as well, the sense of wanting to form connection, this feeling of disappointment, you'll notice with ISTPs as opposed to, say, ESTJs, that ISTPs are more likely to have that sense of discernment they're a bit more confident in their ability to see, yeah, that person doesn't have the qualities I really would want. I like to give this person a chance. Maybe this person I'm not quite going to give another chance because of X, Y, Z reasons, and a bit disappointed in that. But they do have that ability to form and know their personal attitudes more confidently than, say, an ESTJ would. But it's still not an area of strength in and of itself. These are types which are still more natural in the more analytical, more sort of objective space, who over time want to develop and grow the more sentimental judgment, the more personal attitude driven way of forming their close one-to-one connections with others. And yeah, this does over time make them very dutiful, very loyal people. They will do things, as again, uncomplainingly, for the sake of a duty towards someone else who was very dear and very close to them. It's a relationship driven thing. It's not ideology driven, but it is duty driven. And that's and you can see that subtle difference in the ISTP very clearly. Okay. Now we get to the id block, an air of strength that is not valued. So extrovert sensation and introverted thinking. So the more sort of rules-based, authority-based structure, anything like that. An ICP knows and can work with, but does not value and appreciate for its own sake. And out of these, an ISTP especially is disinclined towards extroverted sensation. ISTPs are peaceful people. They're not out to cause a fight. They're not out to raise levels of drama and tension in the room. They have no interest in that whatsoever. These are peaceful people that like to work on things and do things well. They'd rather fighting types just leave them alone. They don't want anything to do with them. But if you were to make an ISTP uncomfortable enough, you'll see a very tough side of them come out. And yeah, a very strong temper can suddenly show itself in that moment when an ISTP is made uncomfortable enough and can't just get away from the people who won't leave them alone, then that side can show. But it's only when they're very, very uncomfortable in that moment. They'd much rather keep themselves. I've known ISTPs be called by other types as almost moral cowards because they do whatever they can to stay out of the conflict, to stay out of a confrontation. They'd much rather, okay, I don't have to do anything, it'll just blow away and I'll be all right. But it's when they can't do that that the fists have to come out. And when they come out properly. Yeah, ISTPs are able to leap into that action in that moment when it is required of them. But yeah, it's not what they like to do in and of itself. Right. When we come to introverted thinking, again, not valued, but used quite a bit more than extroverted sensation. Whereas an ISTP can look very almost overly gentle, even look unassertive most of the time. The introverted thinking is there kind of constantly in the background. And where do you see it for an ISTP? You see it in their analytical rigor and their ability to break apart ideas in terms of what makes sense, what doesn't. They have quite a sharp logic for picking things apart. They do this in a very sort of self-deprecating way as well. In the same way, they don't drum themselves up. A good example, actually, is Anthony Hopkins. Very good example of an actor who is, I'd say, is an ISTP. You know, it's not method acting. What is method acting? Why do you need to method act? You're just you're just playing pretend. That's all you're doing. So why should you have to, you know, go out and pretend to be this person for 2 or 3 weeks? It seems completely unnecessary. It's all the thing Andy Hopkins would say. I'm just pretending to be something else. There's no magic to it. There's nothing special about it. So in the same way that they don't romanticize how they're coming across because of extroverted feeling being vulnerable, in a similar way, they're using that more analytical introverted thinking to break apart sacred cows, to break apart common myths. And they're very good at doing that. They're very good at showing how this thing actually doesn't fit, doesn't actually make sense, doesn't fit together and hold together in and of itself based on its underlying principles. And they're very aware of where structures don't fit together or make sense. But they value the extroverted thinking. So even while they're very analytical in terms of breaking different ideas apart and figuring out what makes sense, what doesn't, in a very sort of straightforward, quite simple way, they are thinking about how to use it more in a more practical way, finding that practical simplicity. And to create that practical simplicity requires both that pragmatic thinking, but also some of that structural thinking to cut away some of the noise, cut away some of the extra facts around the edges, which aren't actually necessary to that flow of process. So you'll find with these types, they utilize that structural thinking to make things more simple, more easy to use and put forwards and actually increase its quality. And they also are, out of many of the more delta types, they can even lean into more philosophical thinking. I can think examples such as Epicureanism, where an ISTP has been able to utilize introverted thinking to set out certain common modes or ways of practice, even a philosophy, for the sake of working as guidelines towards things working well and living a good life, essentially. And the ISTP is a type that has been able to stretch into that area more than, say, the other types because they have such strong introverted thinking for a type that values extroverted thinking. Anyway, that is the ISTP. I hope that was helpful to people. I think the last thing I'll say very quick is that when an ISTP is let down in their introverted feeling, when their personal connections and their personal regard of others is almost disappointed, they can also fall back on introverted thinking more, becoming more about structures, more about certain rules, more about certain principles, as almost a way to defend themselves because they've opened up in the very personal and they've been hurt. And this is a safer zone, even if it's not necessarily desired by them for its own sake. Okay, that's the last point. Right, that's the ISTP. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to learn more about socionics, I have my course, which you can find out more about by emailing worldsocionics@hotmail.com. After applying a 50% discount, I found that has actually led to more business. So I'm actually keeping the 50% discount for the time being. So if you'd like to get the course for £300 as opposed to £600, please email worldsocionics@hotmail.com today. Thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of your day and take care. Bye-bye.